We come now to the time of exhortation for words of counsel and good comfort. To introduce Brother Nat's exhortation to us this morning, we're going to read from Joshua chapter 14 and going to ask Brother Benjamin to lead us in that reading. Now, brothers and sisters, we invite Brother Nat to come forward and exhort us from the word of life concerning.
Well, thanks, Brother Fran, and good morning, everybody, and especially good morning to Brother Clyde. Let me just try and figure out what I'll... All right. So thank you for the spontaneous reading, Joshua chapter 14. This section of Joshua brings us to a bit of a time here where the children of Israel are going around conquering the land. And here, as they cross the Jordan, they have defeated Jericho. Eventually, they work through Ai. And now, over the next 7 years, they're removing the Canaanites and conquering the land. And just flipping back one chapter, it gives us a little bit of context to this section now of what is happening here in Joshua. So Joshua chapter 13 verse 1, it says that Joshua was old and stricken in years, and Yahweh said to him, "You are old and stricken in years, and there remains yet very much land to be possessed." So Joshua is old, but there is still a lot more to be done, a lot more land to be possessed. He's not a young man anymore, Joshua. In fact, as you think about it, there's actually only one other person who is his age, and that is his friend, the man Caleb. You remember they're the only two that were of this age here in the nation of Israel, the only two aged men. And so today we want to consider just four essential characteristics of this man Caleb from Joshua chapter 14, and hoping that this will be good for as he commences his walk in truth, because this is all about ensuring that we have longevity in the truth, to maintain a spirit of consistency and commitment over time. So the four things we're going to look at, I didn't have them all in one sentence, but Jim managed to squeeze them all in. But we'll look at Caleb the Kenizzite, just the fact that he's named as the Kenizzite, what that means. We're going to look at Caleb's committed heart, his commitment around that. We want to look at his courage. So Caleb and his constancy within that. So he is a courageous warrior. But also we want to finish by looking at his constructiveness within the nation and how he influenced other people. And hopefully with these four elements, the Kenizzite, the committed, courageous, and the constructive, that applies you in life in the truth, we will see commitment from the beginning of Caleb's walk right through to the end, over a long period of time. But also for all of us, brothers and sisters, we're all individuals, we're all families, we're all an ecclesia, and hopefully this example will help us to be well equipped for another week in God's service. So chapter 14 opens here with the land being divided. There's been 7 years of war. They're removing the Canaanites, and verse 1 here talks about these are the countries, these are the inheritance that is going on. Even chapter 15 verse 1 as well talks about the borders and where all these inheritance is taking place. So it's amongst this scene of inheritance, amongst the distribution of the land, that there's a little bit of a pause here when we see this faithful man Caleb step forward. And while the rest of the nation here is ready to receive their inheritance, this old man Caleb comes to the front of the queue and he wants his inheritance and he wants to partake in this inheritance of the land. And what I want to really think about is that same enthusiasm that he had when he spied out the land some 45 years earlier. He has now that same enthusiasm. He hasn't lost any spirit that when we last heard about him. He wants his inheritance. He wants his mountain. He wants Hebron. And we're introduced here in verse 6. It says there, the children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite. Now, the Kenizzites were descendants of Esau, and they were not Jewish. They were not partakers of the covenant of Abraham per se, Caleb's name graphically sort of shows us this because it says his name means a dog. He's a Gentile. He's a stranger from the covenant that God made Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so perhaps, in Israel, he hasn't got the proudest and most noblest of background. His family doesn't stem a prominent line within Israel. If we know more about him, we thought that maybe he could be despised by the Israelites with his name meaning dog. But throughout the Bible, whenever we read of Caleb, it constantly repeats and emphasises that he is Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite. 3 times just in this chapter here, for 6 there as we're introduced. Also in verse 13, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. Verse 14, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, Kenizzite. And so maybe it's a background a lot of people wouldn't feel comfortable with, particularly stepping forward and asking for an inheritance. But this did not stop Caleb or hinder him in his faith and his commitment to the hope of Israel. He wasn't one to worry about his past, go, and he moved forward. It was way more interested about the future. And so I guess one of the first lessons we have is that sometimes we hold on to the past, don't we? We think that our history has something to do with maybe excluding us from God's promises. Maybe we find it hard to move forward in our lives because of something in the past, something we've done, or maybe something we continue to do each week. We can't seem to forgive ourselves. And even though everyone else forgives and God even forgives, God forgives amazing, huge, great sins. But we can't sometimes get ourselves motivated. Maybe we sit on the sidelines when it comes to the truth. We don't want to get too involved. We take a backseat. We think we're so far from hope of the promises that we might just sort of stay quiet in the background. But that's not the example of Caleb, because we'll see him letting go of this past. He moves right to the front of the tree. He's at the front of the line, ready to take this inheritance. A lot has been promised to him. He wasn't meant to be a Gentile person, sort of out on the fringe, camped out on the outer edge of the nation. He wants Hebron right there. And later in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, his family is actually listed as part of Judah's posterity. He's amongst the lineage of Judah, that kingly tribe, which I think is amazing. It is the most prominent tribe in Israel. So he's not sitting on the sidelines. We also see later, we'll look at this a bit later, his nephew, Othniel, became the very first judge in Israel as well. And see Caleb influence on him a bit later on. So the point is this, that even though Caleb, the dog, the Kenizzite, his background did not stop him moving forward in life, and the same should be with us. We gather here this morning specifically to consider our past, our actions over the last week, maybe something in our life that we've never come to grips with, and it hinders us in the truth. And we remember our Lord Jesus Christ and how he moved forward in his life and putting down the flesh. The Apostle Paul writes these inspiring words. You know them well in Philippians chapter 3, verse 13 to 14. When the Apostle Paul says this is his example as well, this is what he does. And we know the Apostle Paul's background, where he came from, and he says in Philippians 3, verse 13 to 14, "Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, I forget those things which are behind, and I reach forth unto the things which are before. I press towards the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." And so this is also the example of Caleb this morning. It's to forget those things that are behind. It's to press forward and to for ourselves, I think, to gain forgiveness with our God, to ready to start the week. And perhaps a new phase in our lives. We're cleansed, baptism, the past is gone, it's in the past. And we can now move forward with a renewed and determined spirit, press toward that mark. But for Caleb, what was that mark? Mark was actually Hebron. And he was very convinced he was going to obtain that goal. He was very committed towards it. And we just now want to look at the second point of Caleb, his commitment in verse 7 back in Joshua chapter 14. But before we do that, let's just have a look at the last time we heard of Caleb in Numbers chapter 13. Because, believe it or not, this is, for such a faithful man, this was actually the last words of Caleb all the way back in Numbers chapter 13. Let's have a look. So the last time we see a comment from Caleb, number 13, and then the next one is in Joshua chapter 14, as we read. So Numbers chapter 13, verse 30, these were the last words of Caleb. And he says there in Numbers 13, verse 30, Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. And so this was the last words of Caleb. And 45 years later, we see his next comment in there in Joshua chapter 14. But at the end of verse 7, so we'll go back to Joshua chapter 14, because Caleb refers to this last time that he said these words. So in verse 7, Caleb remembers this and he talks about it here as he comes to Joshua. And he says, back in Joshua 14, verse 7, he says, 40 years old I was when Moses, the servant of Yahweh, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to espy out the land, and I brought him word again as it was in my heart. He spoke the words that were in his heart, he says. We know out of the abundance of the heart that God speaks to Caleb, to spy out the land, looking over the land, back in Numbers 13, he got a huge cluster of grapes, as you remember, right there near Hebron, actually he was. And as a young man, he could have been bursting with enthusiasm, ready to begin a life in the land. And I guess this is for you, Clyde. This is the same sort of example. You're birth with energy, you're 16, you're ready to go. And this was what Caleb was like, ready to begin this time in the land. But as we know, negative words of the spies sent that dream spiraling to the dust. And as a result, people, and Caleb himself, sentenced 40 years wandering in the wilderness. Yeah, think about that from Caleb's point of view. He could have stormed off into the desert on his own. Or even if he did stay with them, he could have wandered with them and complained about it and said, this is all your fault. For 40 years he could have done that. Over the time, he could have started with Paul, Nathan and Abiram. Many opportunities he could to have vented of the change that he wanted to go into the land but wasn't able to. This is not the character of Caleb the Kenizzite. He was committed to this. He was committed to his brothers and sisters, and he was committed more so to his God. And look at the phrase there in verse 8. We haven't heard from Caleb for 45 years. His first word here, he says, verse 8, nevertheless, my brethren that went with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed Yahweh my God. My brethren, he says, his first words for 45 years, he'd been wandering through the 40 years, no fault of his own at all. He could have stood here and pointed his finger, and his first words would have been, I told you so. But here, his commitment to his brothers and sisters, and he positively influences them. He's stuck with his brethren through thick and thin. And once again here, he encourages them again to take a land. Come over to James chapter 5. And James is well known for also using the phrase, my brethren as well. James chapter 5, really probably from verse 7 all the way through to verse 9. James uses a similar kind of thought here when he says to his brethren, he says, be patient therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waits for the precious fruit of the earth and has long patience for it till we receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draws nigh. Here, verse 1, grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge stands before the door. And throughout the epistle of James said, he refers to his brethren, as Caleb did as well. And Caleb wasn't one to bear a grudge either. He drew alongside his brothers. This is he helped them to the land. And this is the same for you, Brother Clyde, and all of our brothers and sisters. We are in ecclesial life. That is what we need to do. But here, let's take the example of Caleb, who drew his brothers and sisters alongside of him. Paul also sums up this kind of characteristic in Galatians 6 verse 2. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Caleb did this day in, day out for 40 years with the very people who had squashed his hope. But here in Joshua 14, he's not asking for a promotion. He doesn't boast about any of that. But he continually wants to inspire others to grow in their faith to their God. And we're also here this morning to remember our Lord, aren't we, who did exactly the same. Come to Hebrews chapter 2, because our Lord made the ultimate sacrifice for his brethren as well. And he wants to draw us alongside of him and inspire us as well. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 9 to 14. Hebrews 2, verse 9. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honour, that he by the grace of God should taste death for every man, for it became him, for whom are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings. For both he that sanctifieth and they who are sanctified are all of one. For which cause he also, he is not ashamed to call them brethren, saying, I will declare thy name unto my brethren. There's our phrase there from Caleb. My brethren, in the midst of Cleave will I sing praise to thee. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children which God has given me. For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that has the power of that is the devil. And so we're here to remember Christ, aren't we? Who called us his brethren. He was the man who gave his all for his brothers and sisters as well. And so come back to Joshua chapter 14, because we've seen that Caleb's focus is to help his brothers and his sisters, but especially towards his God. And we can't go through this phrase, which Caleb is so well known for through the Bible, in verse 8, the end of this, but I wholly followed Yahweh my God. He followed Yahweh his God. This phrase here is actually 3 times. It's worth colouring these in if you haven't already. 3 times just in this chapter alone. Verse 8, in verse 9, wholly followed Yahweh my God, and also verse 14 at the end, wholly followed Yahweh, God of Israel. There's also another 3 other occasions. They're all about Caleb. Numbers chapter 14, 24, Numbers 32, verse 12, and Deuteronomy 1, verse 6. So Caleb is well known for wholly following Yahweh his God. And the word holy there is to be full or to overflow. It's the same word in 2 Kings 1, verse 24. Remember when Jehu drew back a bow and an arrow, and it says he drew it back with his full strength. Its arrow was drawn so far back that the arrow went all the way through Jehoram. That's how much he had pulled this arrow back. It's abundant. It's the greatest strength he can possibly put in. And this is the sort of strength that Caleb is putting into his service for the truth and for his God. He is giving his all, every bit of strength he's got, his whole being. And for Caleb, it was worth it. He treasured God's promise in his heart for so long. You know, he remembered exactly where remember this 45 years ago. Some of us don't remember anything about 45 years ago, but he remembered exactly where God had promised him Hebron. You see that in verse 7? You know, we were in Kadesh Barnea, he says. I remember exactly where I was when you gave me this promise. Kadesh Barnea. He remembered the date as well. He was given the promise. Verse 10 there, he says, it was 45 years ago. What was it that over 45 years gave this man the strength to wholly follow God? Why did Hebron mean so much to him? I love this little point here. Come back to Numbers chapter 13 again. You remember this is where Caleb was when this all took place. So Numbers 13, verse 23. Verse 22. He's in Hebron. It says that they ascended by the south. They came to Hebron in verse 22. And they came in verse 23 to the brook of Eshcol, cut down from there a branch with one of the cluster of grapes, and they bear it between 2 upon a staff. So you remember this brook Eshcol, that's where they get the grapes on. And they're at Hebron here. So he was going back 45 years, Caleb is a young man here. He's spying out the land, and he comes to the brook of Eshcol, which is called Grape Cluster, actually, and it's named after a man who is called Eshcol. He was an Amorite chieftain in Genesis chapter 14, verse 13. But the interesting thing about Eshcol is it says, specifically says, he is confederate to Abram, or as the Hebrew says, he possesses the covenant of Abram. So here is Caleb, just a few miles from Hebron, a place that's named after a Gentile man who possesses the covenant of Abraham. What an inspiration for Caleb, the Kenizzite, the Gentile person who wanted to be a part of the promises of Abraham as well. Hebron was where Abraham was buried. So for this Kenizzite, Hebron is Caleb's link to the promises. It was the promises that Caleb was longing for. This is what made him wholly follow Yahweh for 45 years. And if we look back in back in Joshua chapter 14, verse 9, you can see this is the language of promises. This is the terminology. Look at verse 9. Moses swore to me on that day, he says, surely the land where your feet have trodden, I mean, that sounds like Abraham right there, will be your inheritance. Again, inheritance there, for your children forever. This is language of promises, because you wholly followed Yahweh my God. Where your feet have trodden, to your children forever. So Caleb's conviction here puts him amongst the same kind of caliber of men like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His conviction is going to impact his family because it was going to be his children's inheritance as well. You know, we're all now part of this promise. Clive, you've been baptized to become a part of this promise to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, to Caleb. And for us, and for Caleb, he never lost his first love. And this is our exhortation here in the point here. When Caleb first entered the land 45 years ago, he fell in love with Hebron. He fell in love with the promise. Even though he hadn't seen Hebron for 45 years, he remembered it and he was committed to that. Some of us who have been baptised a bit longer, how do we compare in our commitment to this man? Do we still have our first love? Do we remember the commitment that we had perhaps at our baptism when we first fell in love with the truth? When we first really understood the hope we have? What about this for those who are newly baptised? Clyde, a few others here. Even ourselves. We ask this question. Do we have the commitment to do another 45 years in the truth? Let's say that Jesus Christ stay away for a bit longer. Can we 100% say we will be committed for another 45 years in truth? Because when Caleb spied out the land, all the signs that the kingdom was going to be there. They were going to enter the land. That's what they thought was going to happen. The kingdom was so close. But, you know, for them it was another 45 years away. So as we commence our walk with Clyde, do we have the same faith and commitment as this man Caleb had to last another 45 years in the truth, to have the same zeal and the same energy as our very first day in the truth? Can we say, as Caleb could say, that we are and we will be 100% committed to this? We know this because he says it in verse 11. He says, I am as strong this day as I was in a day that Moses sent me. What an amazing statement. The word strong there means vigor or vigorous. It's the same when Joel was told by David or by Uriah, to set Uriah in the hottest part of the battle. It's his strength, it's hot, energy. Vigorous part. So Caleb here at 85 years is still as strong, as vigorous, as energetic as he was, as hot for the truth as he was 45 years ago. And so Caleb shows us we've got to have a fire that never dies or dwindles, never becomes lukewarm. And in verse 12, Caleb asks for his inheritance. He says, now therefore give me this mountain whereof Yahweh spake in that day. He asked for the Mount of Hebron. Hebron was known to be the place where the city of giants was. back in Numbers chapter 13, verse 22. I'll just see if I can. Numbers 13, verse 22. It had a reputation for being where the giants were. Numbers verse 2. They ascended by the south and came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. So this is where the giants were, the very first time they saw the giants. So for this 85-year-old man here at this point, this is a very bold request. It shows his courage, not in his own strength though, but in God's, because he says there that if Yahweh will be with me, in verse 12, if so be that Yahweh will be with me, I'll be able to drive them out. And so this is the key to constant courage. We have courage because we know that if God is for us, who can be against us? Same in Philippians 4, verse 13. Paul says, I can do anything. I could do all things. I could take Hebron if I want. And he says, but it's through Christ who strengthens me. So Caleb sets his aim very high here, doesn't he? Even though Hebron is one of the most difficult areas in Israel to conquer, he is not content with anything less than that. He's a man of altitude. He's a man who wants the mountain. He wants to get to the top. He's not a man that wants to be just an average kind of person. And for us, I think that, sometimes we think, as long as I'm an average Christian, often we're okay. But Caleb wants to be better. We should follow Caleb's example and meet that challenge to try and be like Christ. We are here this morning to think about this gigantic today of Christ's character, to ascend up to the great heights. We have to aim high for ourselves. We have to set our affection on things above. We have to trust God give us the courage to get to the top. Another interesting thing about this Mount of Hebron is that they've actually already conquered this area. And this is, as we sit here for the end, I think another great lesson. Come back to Joshua chapter 10, verse 39, because it specifically says here, verse 38, Joshua returned and all Israel with him to Debir and fought against it. It says in verse 39, and he took it and the king thereof and all the cities thereof. They smote them with the edge of the sword. They utterly destroyed all the souls that they were in. He left nothing remaining, as he'd already done to Hebron. They've already conquered Hebron. Isn't that interesting? It's strange, maybe, but just come over to chapter 11, verse 21 to 22. Again, at that time, Joshua cut off Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron. So again, they had to do it in chapter 11. And what is happening here is the Anakims are slowly filtering back into this area. Back over in Judges chapter 1, verse 10, they actually reappear once more. And so the lesson that Caleb tells us here is that he expected to fight for his inheritance. And that fighting Anakims was going to be a constant battle. This was not just a one-off battle and it was done and dusted. Often the truth is a life of action. It's an endeavour and it's a constant fight. And as we struggle to climb our own mountain in our own lives, the character of Christ, we know that our enemy of flesh and sin constantly reassert its head. And so for Brother Clyde, and I think Brother Fran sort of mentioned this at the start in his comments, that baptism is not the total finish, it's not the total conquering. It's not sort of we've done it, got the Anakims out of Hebron. Baptism is not finished. Life in Christ is a constant battle. And it doesn't matter whether you're 16 like Clyde, whether you're 25, 45 or even 85 here like Caleb, there is never retirement from the truth. There will always be the enemy to fight. Some of the final words of Christ in Revelation emphasise to him that overcometh. It's a constant battle. And so the lesson of courage from Caleb is to keep on keeping on. It's not just about one-off courage, it's about constant courage and continuing on with our faith in God. Okay, so the final example of Caleb was his contagious spirit. And this is the last one we want to look at. Let's go over chapter into Joshua chapter 15. I just want to read 4 verses there in Joshua 15, verse 13 to 17. It says there, Unto Caleb, son of Jephunneh, he gave a part among the children of Judah, according to the commandment of Yahweh to Joshua, even to the city of Arba, father of Anak, city is Hebron. And Caleb drove the city, 3 sons of Anak, Sheshai, and Ahiman, and Talmai, the children of Anak. And he went up thence to the inhabitants of Debir, and the name of Debir called Kirjath-Sepher. And Caleb said, He that smites Kirjath-Sepher and taketh it, to him will I give Achsah my daughter to wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, took it, and he gave him Achsah his daughter to wife. And it came to pass, as she came unto him, that she moved him to ask of her father a field, and she lighted on her ass, and Caleb said unto her, What wouldest thou? Who answered, Give me a blessing, for thou hast given me a south land. Give me also springs of water, and he gave her the upper springs and the nether springs. So notice here, his inheritance is among the children of Judah, again emphasising his desire to be in the middle of the ecclesia, right in the middle. He didn't want to be. But the question I think here in verse 16, he just killed and taken over Hebron. In verse 16, he says, Can somebody else do Kirjath-Sepher? Whoever smites Kirjath-Sepher will give my wife. And the question is, like, what happened? Did he wear himself out taking Hebron, or why did he not take over this? Is it well, that's enough for me? Well, that's not the Caleb we know. And I think this is Caleb encouraging others to take up the sword, to take up the fight. And Othniel is actually his nephew. He's encouraging others in this fight as well. This incident is also mentioned over in Judges chapter 1, verse 10 to 20. It's a major motivation, actually, for all of Judah. If you read Judges chapter 1, verse 10 to 20, it's a more filled out this event a bit more, and it shows that all of Judah come in and they take up the sword against the enemies. So Caleb is actually encouraging other people. And look at his daughter in verse 19. Doesn't this remind you of somebody? He gets off and off the donkey, and Caleb says, What do you want? And she says, Give me a blessing, for you give me a southland, but give me springs of water and upper springs and the nether springs. This sounds like Caleb, right? This is Caleb's actual attitude as well. She also wasn't content with an average plot of land. She says, the springs of water as well. She had that same determined character that her father had, wanting refreshment, wanting permanency, to be camped by the spirit of the water of word. So Caleb's daughter, Caleb's nephew were encouraged in this way because Caleb has seen negative service in the truth, what negative influences take place. He had seen what happened 45 years earlier when there was negative reports, negative words, negative influences to other people. He'd seen that rolled out through the nation. And he knew that a positive service, a positive character can influence others as well. And so here, he influences this small group of people, ends up sending a ripple effect through all of Judah because of this one man, Caleb. And so for all of us, brothers and sisters, for Brother Clyde, in our ecclesial service, our influence affects other people. We need to make it a positive one. We need to look at this example of Caleb and how he encouraged other people to step up and take up the mantle. This man Othniel, his nephew, who took Debir, mentioned in Judges after Israel were established in the land. And in Judges, we read that Israel is turning away from God, their first cycle of sin and suffering. They're seeking God. And the man who God raises, the man who was already on the scene, the man who became their first deliverer was this man Othniel, who no doubt consistently served God and the rest of this, and took the rest of Israel on this roller coaster ride through Judges. Because Othniel here was a man that was inspired by the consistent and the courageous example of Caleb here, the Kenizzite. So here we are at the bread and the wine. And we know that bread and wine represents the negative and the positive. That the negative, the bread, the putting down of the flesh. As Caleb did, you think about him wandering that wilderness for 40 years, not thinking of his own self, not complaining, but being there for his brethren and sisters. We think of Jesus Christ, who we know in Isaiah 53 says, He was despised, He was rejected, He bore our griefs, He carried our sorrows, and we also walked through the wilderness. On the other hand, we see the positive, the wine, the spirit, the energy, our positive service, as Caleb also had in wholly following Yahweh. His commitment over 45 years, his strength being as strong as it was, the beginning of his life, and the truth to the end. He wanted the heights of Horeb. And we know of Christ also in Isaiah 53. It says, God will divide him a portion with the great. That's his inheritance. He will divide the spoil with the strong because he poured out his soul like wine. He poured out his soul unto death. His blood was poured out. Christ had that commitment to devote his whole life to God and the courage of pouring out his soul to death. And so just like Caleb, like Jesus Christ, as we see Jesus Christ before us, we need to ascend to those heights, don't we, brothers and sisters? So let's, like Caleb, like Jesus Christ, be strong to overcome, to help others to ascend to those heights as well.